Shadows and silence. The day Eleanor Jacobs became invisible started like any other. She arranged fresh flowers in the hallway of their penthouse, selected Dominic's tie, the navy Hermes with subtle gold pattern, his lucky one for board meetings, and prepared his favorite breakfast smoothie with precise measurements of protein powder and organic berries. "I'm meeting with the Westbrook investors tonight," Dominic announced, scrolling through his phone without looking up. "Don't wait up." Eleanor nodded, a practiced smile warming her features, but not quite reaching her eyes. "I'll leave dinner." In the warmer, "Good luck with the meeting." At 42, Eleanor still possessed the quiet beauty that had once made Dominic's heart race 15 years ago. Her chestnut hair, now threaded with occasional silver, framed a face that photographers once suggested could have graced magazine covers. Instead, she'd put aside her art school scholarship to support Dominic's fledgling tech startup, believing in his vision when investors wouldn't take his calls as his company. Nexitech Solutions grew from a 3-person operation in their garage apartment to a billion-dollar enterprise with offices in 7 countries. Eleanor had been his silent partner. She hosted the dinner parties that secured crucial connections, edited the proposals that won major contracts, and stood by his side at every corporate function with graceful poise. That evening, Eleanor worked in her small studio space, the only room in their expansive penthouse that felt truly hers. Her fingers moved deftly across canvas, creating textures and depths that spoke of emotions she rarely verbalized. Painting had become her sanctuary in recent years as Dominic grew more distant. When the front door opened at 1:17 a.m., she was washing brushes in the sink. She heard unfamiliar laughter, high and musical, followed by Dominic's hushed voice. Frozen, brush dripping, blue-tinged water onto her bare feet, Eleanor listened. "You can't stay," she heard him whisper. "Not tonight. When will you tell her?" The female voice was young, confident. "It's been months, Dom." Eleanor's hand steadied against the sink. In that moment, suspicions crystallized into certainty. The following week unfolded in a blur of revelations. Vanessa Reed was 27, a former model-turned-marketing executive who had joined Nexitech 6 months ago. With her sleek blonde hair, curated social media presence, and connections to Silicon Valley's elite, she represented everything Eleanor wasn't: young, ambitious, and perfectly calibrated for Dominic's new world. "We've grown apart," Dominic explained one evening, his voice clinically detached as he outlined their impending separation. "You've stayed the same while I've evolved. Vanessa understands the pressures of my position." Eleanor sat still, her artist's eye noting how his expensive haircut couldn't quite disguise his receding hairline, how his tailored suit concealed the beginnings of a paunch. She wondered when she'd stop seeing him clearly. "I've had my lawyers prepare a settlement," he continued, sliding documents across their imported marble coffee table. "You'll be comfortable. The penthouse goes to me, of course. But I've purchased a condo for you in Westbrook Heights. It's suitable." Eleanor didn't cry. Not when she signed the papers. Not when she packed her art supplies and personal belongings. Not even when she overheard Dominic on the phone with Vanessa, laughing about their upcoming vacation to the Maldives, the destination Eleanor had suggested for years. On her final day, she left only one thing behind: a small, unframed canvas. A simple painting of a birdcage, door flung wide, empty inside. No note, no explanation. 2 weeks later, in her suitable condo with walls she wasn't allowed to paint or modify, Eleanor finally broke. Surrounded by moving boxes and the shattered remains of her former life, she wept until her throat burned and her eyes swelled shut. Then, as dawn broke over the city skyline, she picked up a brush for the first time since the separation, and she began to paint herself back into existence. Fragments and foundations, the condo in Westbrook Heights felt like a hotel room, impersonal, sterile, and designed for temporary occupation. Eleanor spent the first month moving through it like a ghost, touching nothing, changing nothing. Settlement money sat untouched in her account, a sum that Dominic had calculated to be generous but not excessive. Enough to keep her comfortable but dependent. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor found herself standing before the living room's bare white wall, staring at it until her vision blurred. Suddenly, she pressed her palm against it, leaving a smudged handprint. Something inside her shifted a small rebellion against the pristine emptiness. That evening, she dragged her first canvas into the living room and set up her easel by the window. The painting that emerged wasn't beautiful. It was raw, chaotic, and pulsing with anguish. She worked through the night, ignoring the buzzing of her phone as Dominic's assistant called about some remaining paperwork by morning. She'd created something that made her pause. A fractured woman, composed of shattered mirror pieces, each reflecting different parts of a life disassembled. It wasn't technically perfect, but it vibrated with authenticity. What now? She whispered to the empty room. Her answer came unexpectedly. Patricia, her former art school roommate who had maintained a tentative friendship despite Dominic's dismissive attitude toward her bohemian lifestyle, invited Eleanor to a small gallery opening downtown. You need to get out, Patricia insisted over the phone. Besides, the gallery owner is looking for new artists. Bring photos of your work. Eleanor almost refused, but something about the blank walls surrounding her made the decision. I'll be there. Winter Lake Gallery occupied a renovated warehouse in the city's emerging arts district. Eleanor arrived wearing the simplest black dress from her former life, feeling simultaneously overdressed and underprepared, with paint-stained fingers mingling with collectors and designer clothing. You came. Patricia embraced her, smelling of turpentine and jasmine. There's someone you need to meet. Thomas Reynolds didn't look like Eleanor's mental image of a gallery owner. In his early 40s, with unruly auburn hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose, he wore a rumpled button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with faded paint stains. So you're the mysterious Eleanor I've heard about, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. Patricia tells me you're brilliant, Eleanor flushed. I used to paint. I'm finding my way back to it, Joan Patricia urged, nudging Eleanor's shoulder. With trembling hands, Eleanor presented her phone with images of her recent works, The Fractured Mirror Woman, a series of landscapes that morphed into abstract emotional states, and several smaller studies of hands in various positions of giving and taking. Thomas scrolled through them slowly, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, eyes bright behind his glasses. These aren't technically perfect, he said bluntly. Eleanor's heart sank. But they're alive, he continued. They're honest in a way that's rare. Where have you been hiding? In plain sight. She answered, surprising herself with her candor. Later that night, over glasses of wine in the gallery's back office, Eleanor found herself telling Thomas about her marriage, her abandoned art school dreams, and the slow erosion of her identity. Dominic needed someone to reflect his success back to him, she explained. Eventually, I became just another accessory like his watches or cars. When he upgraded his life, he upgraded me to right out of the picture. Thomas listened without interruption, without judgment. When she finished, he leaned forward. What would you create if you weren't afraid? He asked. The question lingered in Eleanor's mind as she returned to her condo. That night, she dreamed of colors she'd never used, techniques she'd never tried. She woke before dawn and began sketching feverishly. Over the following weeks, Thomas became her unexpected anchor. He offered her the gallery's back studio space to work in, introduced her to local artists, and most importantly, challenged her to push beyond technical skill toward emotional truth. Art that sells and art that matters aren't always the same thing, he told her one afternoon as they walked through a museum. Find what makes you bleed onto the canvas. 3 months after leaving the penthouse, Eleanor received an invitation to Nexitec's annual charity gala. Dominic's assistant had sent it automatically, failing to remove her from the company list. Included was a personal note from Dominic. Feel free to attend if you're comfortable. Vanessa and I would welcome the chance to show there are no hard feelings. Eleanor's first instinct was to tear it up. Instead, she pinned it to her studio wall and painted around it, creating a swirling, fiery landscape that consumed the edges of the invitation, but left its condescending message visible at the center. When Thomas saw it, it was quiet for a long moment. Have you considered showing your work? finally asked. I have a small exhibition opening in my secondary gallery space next month. Nothing major, just emerging artists. Eleanor hesitated, thinking of Dominic's potential reaction, the social circles that would inevitably overlap. I'd need a pseudonym, she said slowly, the idea taking shape. Something that's mine alone. Thomas smiled. Who do you want to be? That night, Eleanor looked at her reflection, really looked for the first time in years. The woman staring back wasn't the polished corporate wife or the broken-hearted ex. She was someone emerging with determined eyes and hands stained with pigment. She picked up her phone and called Thomas. E.J. Winters, she said when he answered. That's who I want to be. In her studio, a new canvas waited her largest yet. Eleanor mixed her paints with renewed purpose, adding a special medium that would make certain elements shimmer under gallery lighting. As she worked, she realized she was no longer creating from pain alone. She was building something new from the fragments of her past. Strokes of Freedom 6. Months after signing the divorce papers, Eleanor barely recognized her life. The suitable condo had transformed into a vibrant studio home, canvases leaning against every wall and sketches pinned to surfaces like exotic butterflies. She'd painted the walls herself, deep teal in the living room, burnt sienna in the bedroom, breaking every clause in her rental agreement. They can keep the security deposit, she'd told Thomas with newfound defiance. Need to live in color again? The debut exhibition of E.J. Winters at Thomas's secondary gallery had been a modest success. 3 pieces sold enough to encourage Eleanor, but not enough to draw attention from Dominic's social circles. She preferred it that way, working in peaceful obscurity while developing her distinctive style, multi-layered paintings that revealed different scenes depending on the viewing angle and lighting. Today, however, marked a turning point. Thomas had arrived at her door unannounced, practically vibrating with excitement. Josephine Blackwell was at the gallery yesterday, he announced, brushing past Eleanor into her paint-scented living room. Josephine was the city's most influential art critic, known for her brutal honesty and career-making endorsements. Eleanor froze. And she stood in front of Metamorphosis for 27 minutes. I timed it. Thomas paced the room, pushing his glasses up his nose repeatedly. Then she asked about the artist. I gave her your prepared biographer, inclusive mid-career change, wishes to let the work speak for itself. Eleanor's heart raced. What did she say? She's featuring you in her monthly column, Voices to Watch. It goes to print tomorrow. The reality of potential exposure made Eleanor's stomach tighten. Dominic reads that magazine. Thomas stopped pacing. Are you still afraid of him finding out? The question hung between them. Eleanor turned to the large canvas she'd been working on, a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. Her body partially transformed into a flock of birds taking flight. No, she realized aloud. I'm afraid of him not finding out. Of creating all. This and him never knowing what I became after he discarded me. Thomas's expression softened. He approached her slowly, stopping just short of touching her. Over these months, they developed a careful dance of almost intimacy, neither willing to risk the friendship that had become so essential. Then let him see, Thomas said simply. The column appeared as promised. Within days, Eleanor's phone began ringing with inquiries from other galleries and collectors. Thomas helped her navigate this new terrain, advising her on pricing, exhibition terms, and maintaining her privacy. They want the mystery, he explained. It adds value. As summer faded into autumn, E.J. Winters became the whispered name at gallery openings and private collectors' dinners. Eleanor's work evolved, growing bolder and more technically complex. She experimented with incorporating unusual materials, shattered glass, gold leaf, even fragments of her old wedding photos meticulously painted over and transformed. Meanwhile, across town in the penthouse she once called home, Dominic's carefully constructed new life was showing stress fractures, Eleanor learned. This through Patricia, who remained connected to their former social circle. Nexitec stock had taken hits after 2 failed product launches. Competitors were advancing faster, hungrier. Dominic had begun drinking more heavily at events, sometimes arguing publicly with Vanessa, whose shine had dimmed in his eyes as quickly as Eleanor's once had. I attended the Hendersons' anniversary party last weekend, Patricia reported over coffee. Apparently, Vanessa made a scene when Dominic flirted with James Henderson's new assistant. Eleanor surprised herself by feeling nothing, neither satisfaction nor sorrow. Their relationship isn't my concern anymore. Patricia studied her friend's face. You really have moved on, haven't you? Eleanor thought of her studio, her growing reputation, and the quiet evenings spent discussing art theory with Thomas over takeout containers and bottles of wine. I've moved forward, she corrected gently. November brought Eleanor's biggest opportunity yet, the prestigious Archer Foundation, which hosted the city's most exclusive annual art gala, selected 3 of her pieces for their winter exhibition. The event drew the elite from both coasts, celebrities, tech moguls, old money families, and new influencers. Dominic never misses the Archer Gala, Eleanor murmured when Thomas showed her the invitation.
X-Tech donates heavily to their education initiatives.
Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch warmed through the thin fabric of her paint-splattered shirt. You don't have to attend in person. Most of your collectors have never met you. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, leaning into his touch. No, it's time. That evening, as she worked late in her studio, Eleanor received an unexpected email. From Vanessa. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Eleanor, this is awkward, but I thought you should know that Dominic has been following the work of this artist E.J. Winters obsessively. He's trying to arrange a private commission through his connections. Something about the work speaks to him. He doesn't know it's you, I don't think, but he's planning to attend the Archer Gala specifically to meet the artist. I thought you might want to prepare yourself if you're also attending. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how things happened. Vanessa Eleanor read the message 3 times, emotions cycling rapidly through her body. Then, surprising herself, she began to laugh for free. Genuine sound that echoed through her paint-filled home. She forwarded the email to Thomas with a single line. I need a dress that makes a statement. His reply came within minutes. I know, just. The designer, as December approached, Eleanor threw herself into completing her masterpiece for the gala, large triptych titled Phoenix Rising. Unlike her previous works, this one contained no ambiguity, no hidden messages. It depicted a woman's transformation from cage to flame to freedom. With such emotional clarity that it left early viewers speechless the night before the gala. Thomas visited her studio to help create the paintings for transport. As they worked, side by side, Eleanor felt a familiar tension between them. The unspoken possibility that had grown over months of shared passion for art and healing. Are you ready for tomorrow? He asked, carefully wrapping protective material around the frame. Eleanor secured the last corner of the crate before answering. I'm not the same woman he left behind. I'm not afraid anymore. Thomas stepped closer, the workshop's low light catching the auburn highlights in his hair. Never should have been afraid. You're extraordinary, Eleanor. You always were. It's for. A moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her paint-stained hand gently and turned back to the crates. Tomorrow, he promised, everything changes. That night, Eleanor slept dreamlessly for the first time in months, wrapped in the certainty of who she had become and who she was still becoming. Colors of recognition. The Archer Foundation Gala transformed the city's modern art museum into a glittering wonderland.
Oh.
Crystal chandeliers hung low over marble floors, while ice sculptures depicting famous artworks melted slowly at the center of each elegantly set table. The guest list read like a who's who of influence, an affluent deck, billionaires mingled with Hollywood directors. Fashion designers with venture capitalists. Dominic arrived fashionably late, Vanessa on his arm in a designer gown that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. She looked beautiful but tense, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Dominic hardly noticed. His attention was fixed on the exhibition catalog clutched in his free hand, open to the page featuring E.J. Winters' work. The artist is actually attending tonight, he told an older couple who had approached to exchange pleasantries. Jonathan at the foundation confirmed it. First public appearance. You've become quite the fan, Vanessa observed with a tightness. in her voice that Dominic missed entirely. "There's something familiar about the work," he replied, scanning the crowded room. "Like it was created specifically for me to find." Across the gallery, hidden behind a massive floral arrangement, Eleanor watched them. She had arrived early with Thomas, using the staff entrance to avoid immediate detection. "Oh," she observed. The man who had once been her husband, noting how he seemed simultaneously more polished and more hollow than when she'd left. "Witty," Thomas whispered, his hand hovering near the small of her back, without quite touching her. Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of her dress, a masterpiece in its own right. The designer, a friend of Thomas, had created a gown inspired by Eleanor's paintings, midnight blue silk that shifted to reveal hidden layers of copper and gold when she moved, with delicate beadwork suggesting constellations across the bodice. Her chestnut hair, now grown long and styled in loose waves, was pinned back with a simple gold comb Thomas had given her for luck. Most striking was her transformation beyond clothing and hair, the woman who had once made herself small to accommodate. Dominic's expanding ego now stood tall, radiating quiet confidence. Her face, free from the constant anxiety of trying to please, had relaxed into natural beauty. She had even embraced the silver strands in her hair, which caught the light like metallic paint strokes. "I'm ready," she confirmed, accepting the champagne flute Thomas offered. The evening progressed according to tradition. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and the auction portion began raising millions for arts education. Throughout it all, Eleanor remained partially obscured at her table, engaging in conversation with fellow artists, but avoiding the main pathways where Dominic prowled. Finally, at precisely 10:30 p.m., the Foundation's director took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat tonight. As many of you know, the mysterious E.J. Winters has captured the art world's imagination this year. Tonight, for the first time, the artist has agreed to discuss the inspiration behind the magnificent triptych Phoenix Rising, which will be unveiled momentarily. Please welcome E.J. Winters." A spotlight swept the room, finally settling on Eleanor as she rose from her seat. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, partly from the revelation that E.J. Winters was a woman rumors had suggested a reclusive male artist, and partly from the stunning vision she presented. Eleanor walked confidently to the small stage, aware of every eye upon her. Thomas moved to stand near the back wall, giving her space while remaining a reassuring presence. "Thank you for your warm welcome," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Art has always been my first language, even when I was silenced by circumstances. Phoenix Rising is a personal journey from containment to liberation, from being defined by another to defining myself." As she spoke, assistants unveiled the triptych behind her. The three massive canvases created a narrative of rebirth so powerful that several attendees audibly gasped. The first panel showed a woman in a gilded cage, her features indistinct, but her posture conveying quiet desperation. The second depicted the same cage engulfed in flames, the woman's form beginning to transform. The final panel showed her emerged, phoenix-like, powerful and radiant against a dawn sky, from his position near the front. Dominic stood frozen, champagne flute halfway to his lips. Eleanor's gaze found his for the briefest moment before moving on, acknowledging him no more than any other audience member. "This piece represents not just my journey, but the potential transformation available to anyone who has been diminished, overlooked, or discarded," she continued. "It's about finding strength in what remains after everything familiar has burned away." The applause was immediate and overwhelming. As Eleanor stepped away from the microphone, collectors surrounded her, business cards extended, voices eager. Through the crowd, she glimpsed Dominic pushing forward, Vanessa trailing reluctantly behind him. "Eleanor," his voice cut through the buzz of conversation, loud enough to turn nearby heads. "Eleanor Jacobs." She turned slowly, composing her features into a pleasant, neutral expression, the kind one might offer a distant acquaintance. "Hello, Dominic? Vanessa?" She nodded to each of them. "Enjoying the exhibition?" Dominic stared at her as if seeing an apparition. You're E.J. Winters? But ... How? When? E.J. Winters is a professional name. Eleanor Jacobs Winters, she explained. Calmly as for how, I simply returned to what I always loved. What I set aside to support your dreams. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside Dominic, her eyes darting between them. Your work is incredible, she offered awkwardly. Truly moving. Thank you, Eleanor, replied with genuine grace. Dominic seemed to recover his composure, straightening. His tie in a gesture Eleanor recognized from countless corporate events. We should talk privately. Perhaps we could have dinner next week. I've actually been hoping to commission a piece for the penthouse. I'm afraid my schedule is quite full. Eleanor interrupted gently. The Saito Gallery in Tokyo is hosting my next exhibition, and preparations are consuming all my time. Tokyo, Dominic repeated, his expression flickering between disbelief and something else, perhaps regret. That's impressive. A familiar voice joined the conversation. Beyond impressive, Thomas said, appearing at Eleanor's side. Eleanor's waiting list for commissions extends to years now.
The Guggenheim
Has expressed interest in her early works. Dominic's eyes narrowed as he assessed Thomas, noting the way he stood protectively close to Eleanor without being possessive. And you are Thomas Reynolds, gallery owner, and ... He glanced at Eleanor, something warm passing between them. Friend. Before Dominic could respond, the foundation director approached, accompanied by a famous film director. Ms. Winters, Charles is particularly taken with your triptych and would like to discuss featuring it in his next film's pivotal scene. Eleanor smiled apologetically at Dominic and Vanessa. If you'll excuse me, duty calls. She walked away. With Thomas beside her, she felt Dominic's eyes boring into her back. For a moment, she remembered how desperately she had once craved his approval, how completely his opinion had defined her worth. Now, that need had dissolved like morning mist. Later, as the gala wound down, Eleanor found herself on the museum's terrace, taking a moment of quiet under the winter stars. The door opened behind her, and she turned, expecting Thomas. Instead, Vanessa stood there, elegant and uncertain. May I join you? She asked. Eleanor nodded, surprised. Vanessa moved to stand beside her at the railing. I wanted to say something. Without Dominic present, she hesitated. I admire what you've done, how you've rebuilt. Thank you, Eleanor replied, studying the younger woman's face. He's not the man I thought he was, Vanessa continued quietly. Or perhaps he is exactly that man, and I was too blinded to see it. Eleanor felt no triumph at this confession, only a strange compassion. See what we need to see, until we're ready for the truth. Vanessa nodded slowly. Your paintings helped me see it, she straightened, composing herself. Anyway, I wanted you to know that, and to wish you well. As Vanessa turned to leave, Eleanor called after her softly. Vanessa, there's life after. Dominic, remember that. The younger woman's smile was sad but genuine. I'm beginning to believe it. When Thomas found Eleanor minutes later, she was looking up at the night sky, her expression peaceful. Success? He asked, offering his jacket as the December air grew colder. Beyond anything I imagined, she admitted, accepting the jacket in his proximity. But not for the reasons I expected. Thomas's hand found hers on the stone railing, their fingers intertwining naturally, meaning. I thought I needed Dominic to see who I've become, to witness my success. She turned to face him fully. But when the moment came, I realized his recognition meant nothing. It was empty validation from someone who never truly saw me. Thomas's eyes, warm and perceptive behind his glasses, held hers. And now I understand that the only recognition that matters came long before tonight, from myself. And, ... She squeezed his hand. From you. In the gallery behind them, guests continued to admire the triptych, pointing out details and discussing techniques. Eleanor's phoenix, rendered in luminous golds and reds, soared above the ashes of her former life, not in triumph over others, but in celebration of her own rebirth. The painting had found its audience, and Eleanor at last had found herself. The masterpiece unveiled spring arrived with a gentle persistence that mirrored Eleanor's own journey. Cherry blossoms dusted the city parks with pale pink confetti, and gallery windows displayed bright, optimistic works that seemed to capture the season's promise of renewal. In her expanded studio, she had purchased the adjacent condo and knocked down walls to create a space worthy of her growing ambitions. Eleanor stood before her newest creation. At 7 feet tall and 12 feet wide, Liberation was her most ambitious work yet. Acquiring a custom-built stretcher and specialized supports, she had been working on it for 4 months since returning from her successful Tokyo exhibition. "Finished," she said simply, as Thomas entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee from their favorite cafe. He stopped, taking in the massive canvas with a slow, appreciative gaze. Unlike her previous works, this painting incorporated 3-dimensional elements, fragments of metal and wood that emerged from the surface, creating actual shadows rather than just painted ones. The composition depicted a circular library with books and ladders extending toward an open ceiling where constellations formed the shape of a woman dancing among stars. Eleanor Thomas breathed, setting down the coffees. "This is transcendent," she smiled, wiping her hands on her paint-stained apron. "It feels right for the foundation launch." The Eleanor Jacobs Foundation for Creative Renewal had begun. As a simple idea after the Archer Gala way to provide grants and studio space to artists recovering from personal trauma. With her success and Thomas's business acumen, it had evolved into something substantial, with corporate sponsorships and a board of respected arts advocates. "Speaking of the foundation," Thomas said, handing her a coffee, "the venue is confirmed for next month's charity auction. The governor's wife has agreed to be the honorary chair." Eleanor nodded, her mind already racing with logistical details. The auction would be her first major public event since the gala 4 months ago, an event that had transformed her from emerging artist to established name. Its art magazines had featured profiles of the reclusive genius who emerged from personal tragedy. Though Eleanor had granted no interviews and approved no photographs, her privacy remained precious. Even as her work became increasingly public, "Any word from the Thornfield Gallery about hosting the Foundation's first exhibition series?" she asked, sipping her coffee. Thomas's smile held a hint of mischief. "Better than that. I received an offer this morning for their entire building." Eleanor nearly choked on her coffee. "The whole building? It's prime real estate in the Arts District. Who would sell it? Apparently the owner is liquidating assets after a series of unfortunate investment decisions." Thomas adjusted his glasses, including significant losses in a tech company called Nexitech. Eleanor set down her cup slowly. "Dominic's company." Thomas nodded, lauded after they lost the Meridian contract. "Rumors of a hostile takeover are circulating." Eleanor absorbed this information with surprising detachment. Once, Dominic's business troubles would have consumed her nights spent reviewing proposals, making calls to sympathetic investors, massaging his ego through the crisis. Now it felt like news about a distant acquaintance. "Can we afford the building?" she asked practically. Thomas stepped closer, his eyes bright with possibility. "With your Tokyo sales and the advance from the New York exhibition? Yes, it would be tight, but we could convert the upper floors into foundation offices and subsidized artist studios. The main gallery spaces would showcase both established and emerging artists, with proceeds supporting the foundation's work." Eleanor moved to the window, looking out at the city skylines, so different from this angle than from the penthouse she'd once called home. "A permanent home for the foundation," she mused. "A place where people can rebuild like I did." "With one significant difference," Thomas added, coming to stand beside her. "They won't have to do it alone." Eleanor turned to face him, acutely aware of how their relationship had evolved over these months. From professional alliance to friendship to something deeper that neither had fully named. Thomas had been careful, respectful of her healing process, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. "I was never truly alone," she said softly. "Not once you came into my life." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a guard lowering, a question forming. Before he could speak, Eleanor's phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from Patricia. "Turn on Channel 8 News," now frowning.
Eleanor reached for the remote and switched on the studio's small television.
The business news segment showed footage of Dominic being escorted from the Nexitech building, his expression thunderous. The headline scrolled beneath, "Tech mogul Dominic Jacobs ousted as CEO amid financial scandal." "Oh," Eleanor breathed, her hand covering her mouth. The reporter explained that financial irregularities had been discovered during a routine audit, suggesting Dominic had been inflating company valuations and misrepresenting product capabilities to investors. The board had voted unanimously for his removal pending investigation. A brief clip showed Vanessa leaving their building with packed suitcases. Ignoring reporters' questions as she climbed into a waiting car, Eleanor switched off the television. Feeling a complex wave of emotions, not satisfaction or vindication, but a strange, sad understanding of how ambition, untethered from integrity, could destroy what it sought to build. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked. Gently, Eleanor nodded. "Thinking about my foundation speech for the auction? About how we're defined not by our successes or failures, but by how we rebuild after devastation." Thomas's hand found hers, warm and steady. "You've become quite the philosopher." "I've had an excellent teacher," she replied, squeezing his fingers, "in loss and in renewal." The night of the foundation auction arrived with perfect early summer weather. The venue, a renovated historic theater, buzzed with anticipation as guests in evening wear admired the displayed artworks. Eleanor's Liberation dominated the main wall, dramatically lit to highlight its dimensional elements. Eleanor moved through the crowd in a gown of her own design, simple ivory silk with hand-painted elements that changed color under different lighting. Her hair was swept up elegantly, secured with the gold comb that had become something of a signature accessory. As foundation chairperson, she delivered a brief opening speech that outlined their mission, without revealing her personal connection. "To it, art saved me," she told the attentive audience. "I believe it can save others. Not just through creation, but through the community it builds and the voice it gives to those who have been silenced." The auction proceeded brilliantly, with Liberation as the final lot, when the bidding opened at $200,000. Eleanor held her breath. By the time the gavel fell at $1 million, she was blinking back tears. "Sold to the gentleman in the back," announced the auctioneer. "It's to Harrison Bennett of Bennett Media Group." Eleanor searched the crowd for the buyer, curious about who had valued her work so highly. A distinguished older man approached, his white hair contrasting with his dark suit. "Ms. Winters," he said, extending his hand. "Extraordinary piece. My late wife was an artist who never received the recognition she deserved. Your foundation's mission speaks to me." "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," Eleanor replied warmly. "Your generosity will help many artists find their voice." As Bennett moved away, Thomas appeared at her side, his expression troubled. "Eleanor, there's someone here you should know about." She followed his gaze to the entrance, where Dominic stood alone, looking diminished in a suit that seemed slightly too large for him now. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by something hesitant and unfamiliar. "Should I ask security to escort him out?" Thomas asked quietly. Eleanor considered this for a moment, then shook her head. "No, let him stay." Throughout the evening, she was aware of Dominic watching her from a distance, never approaching but clearly waiting for an opportunity. Finally, as the crowd thinned and guests began departing, Eleanor nodded to Thomas and made her way to a quiet alcove near the theater's original ticket booth. Dominic followed, as she knew he would. "Congratulations," he said, when they were relatively private. "Foundation is ... impressive." "Thank you," she replied simply. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his posture less commanding. "I saw your painting." "Liberation. It's powerful," Eleanor nodded, waiting. "I came too. ... He faltered, seeming to struggle with words for perhaps the first time in his life. "I wanted to say I'm sorry, Eleanor, for how I treated you, for not seeing who you were." She studied him, this man who had once been the center of her universe. "Thank you for saying that." "Is there any chance?" he began. "No," she interrupted gently but firmly. "There isn't, Dominic." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "Another. First, I understand. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what I lost. Who I lost. The woman you lost doesn't exist anymore, Eleanor said. She disappeared when you left her behind. Dominic glanced across the room to where Thomas was speaking with a group of patrons, occasionally looking their way with barely concealed concern. He seems like a good man, Dominic observed. He is, Eleanor confirmed. He sees me. The real. Me? Dominic absorbed this with a small nod. I hope, I hope you'll be very happy, Eleanor. I already am, she replied with quiet certainty, as Dominic turned to leave. Eleanor felt the final threads of her past life release their hold. There was no triumph in his downfall, no satisfaction in his regret, only the peaceful knowledge that she had transcended the story they once shared. Thomas approached cautiously after Dominic left. Everything okay? Eleanor smiled, taking his hand. Everything is perfect. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. She led him through a side door onto the theater's small rooftop garden, where fairy lights twinkled among potted plants. The city spread before them, a tapestry of lights against the darkening sky. I've been working on something besides liberation, she admitted. Something just for us. From her evening bag, she withdrew a small, flat package wrapped in silk. Thomas unwrapped it carefully to reveal a miniature painting intimate in scale after her recent monumental works. It showed two figures sitting side by side on a bench, looking at an unseen horizon. Their hands were intertwined between them, rendered in exquisite detail against the abstracted background. The future, she explained softly. If you want it. Thomas looked from the painting to Eleanor, his eyes bright with emotion. I've wanted it since the day you walked into my gallery with those first raw, honest paintings. I just didn't want to rush you. I'm not rushing, she assured him. No, I'm finally ready to begin again. Properly this time. When he kissed her, it felt like the completion of a composition long in the making, elements finally aligned, colors harmonized, perspective clear at last. Later that evening, they walked together through the newly purchased Thornfield building, their footsteps echoing in the empty galleries. Eleanor's vision for the space poured out in excited word studios upstairs. Classrooms in the back, exhibition spaces transformed to welcome artists at all stages of their journeys. We'll need a resident therapist, she was saying. Art therapy should be central to the program. Thomas watched her with undisguised admiration. You've thought of everything. Not everything, she admitted, stopping in the largest gallery space. I haven't decided what piece should be permanently displayed here in the entrance, something that embodies the foundation's purpose. Thomas considered this. What about a new work? Something we create together? Eleanor's smile bloomed slowly, like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas. I'd like that. A true collaboration. Outside, the city continued its rhythmic pulse of light and life. Inside, surrounded by empty walls waiting to be filled. Eleanor Jacobs Winters, once invisible, now illuminated, began planning her next masterpiece. Not a painting this time, but a life. One. Created not from desperation or revenge or even healing, but from joy, purpose, and the quiet certainty of being truly seen.